Okay, welcome to Untangled FM's The Money Maverick radio show. I'm Marcus Matthews, and I'm your host for this week's show. This week, we have an absolutely amazing guest. This guest has a lot of expertise in the silver market, and his name is David Morgan. David Morgan has written a book called Get the Skinny on Silver, one of the very few books on the market which actually specifically writes about silver. He runs his own website and he commentates on international radio stations and TV stations, and he writes a very well-regarded newsletter on a number of different levels. And I would say, certainly in my own opinion, one of the, if not the top silver commentator that I know. Welcome to the show, David.
Marcus, thank you very much.
So what I'd like to cover with David today is, obviously we're going to be talking about silver, but as this is the Money Maverick show, rather than just talking about the basics of silver, which we'll obviously touch on and cover as well, is we want to talk about those things which for the average layperson who doesn't know that much about investing or is possibly not interested in the whole investing side of things, why it's still important, if not more important, to actually look at precious metals, and obviously we'll be talking about silver in particular, as something that is something that you hold as a real asset, a real monetary item. More interestingly, what I'd like to cover as well is some of the more energetic and spiritual aspects of money and of silver and precious metals and how they fit in society, why that's important, and obviously see if David has some particular comments in that area. So, first of all, David, I'd just like to ask you a little bit more about yourself so you can introduce yourself. Tell the listeners a little bit how you got into the whole precious metals and the silver business. Where did you start? What did you study? And what was your sort of, if you like, road to Damascus for precious metals?
Well, that's a long story. I'll speed it up. But when I was 11 years old, the coinage changed in the United States from 90% silver to what we call the Johnson slugs. And I used to get 25 cents a week allowance, and they were all 90% silver coins. And then one day I got this quarter, but it was copper filled and zinc coated, or nickel coated, I think. And I thought about it and thought, geez, this cannot be the same value as silver. But that wasn't really the start, but it planted the seed. And I was always fascinated by money and finance. I don't know why, I just was. And I was an avid reader as a kid. And what I determined was that there was a way to actually make a living by investing. And I thought, wow, is that cool or what? How does that work? So I read a great deal about money, finance, investing that most people would ignore at the age I was reading that stuff. And I discovered the truth about the banking system and fractional reserve banking. And once I understood how the whole thing came into existence by the goldsmiths taking gold and holding it, and then realizing that very few people actually ever came back for their gold, but used the certificates as an exchange mechanism, that they could really inflate the money supply for their own benefit, and most people weren't the wiser. And, of course, that's the short story of fiat banking. So once I discovered that, I became what I call myself a metals head. And I really was a lot more of a gold bull than a silver bull for a very long time. But that was the start.
So when was that? Was that still after the coinage change? How old were you when you came across this information, which I only came across much more recently?
I would say I was probably in the 17, 18 time frame. Those 2 years is when I really started getting deeply into the topic, because I'd read, kind of the basic stuff. I took this correspondence books on how to invest in, and they had a small section on gold stocks and how risky they are, but they're only appropriate in certain time frames. And it wasn't very deep. I actually met the guy that wrote that course later on. But
who was that? Because, I mean, this sort of stuff is getting out there now, and hopefully people are listening to this show, and they may already have an inkling, or they probably do, that there's something seriously wrong. If you got that information then, there weren't so many people actually knowing about it and sharing it, were there?
No, there weren't. One of the books was None Dare Call a Conspiracy. I forget what year it was published, but it was Dr. Gary Allen, I believe, was the author. The book I'm referring to is pretty mainstream. It's by Hume, H-U-M-E, was the publisher. The actual author was a guy named Larry Spears. And Larry and I have known each other for years now. So, I just filtered this. So once I discovered the fractional reserve banking and how they basically created money out of nothing, I really got motivated. And that's what, of course, from that point till now pretty much has been a journey where I've been a continuous learner. I'm always learning more, and it's been quite a path, as you well know, Marcus.
Yes. Okay, so were you sort of studying and working full time, or what point did you get into making it your main activity to if you like, teach, educate, share, write the newsletter, and do the great videos that you do now?
Thanks. Well, when I was, I don't know exactly the age, 14 or 15, my dad asked me what I want to do for a living, and I expressed what I just said. I'm passionate about the markets, finance, money. I want to do something in business. Maybe I should be a stockbroker. And he blew up. He said, absolutely not. I don't want to do anything of the sort. And it really squelched my dream because I answered from the head and the heart. But that's what I really wanted to do. So I looked at other occupations and looked at a lot of them and discovered how interesting flying would be. So I started flying when I was 16 and ended up getting an aeronautical engineering degree and started teaching flying when I was 19. I got all my ratings, and I went into the aircraft industry when I got out of school, but I still was passionate about the metals, and as soon as I had any extra money, I was buying physical metal, primarily gold, some silver, and then when I got enough money to open a futures account, I started trading. So I've always been in the metals markets pretty much from the time I had enough money to get in, and passionate about it. I was in the aircraft industry for a brief time. The aircraft industry had a big lull. I lost my job. I started doing a little consulting and working for another broker. I also sold coins for a very brief time. And then I started trading for a living, which was up and down and more difficult to do than most people think. And then I had the idea for the website, and I started that about 13 years ago. So as far as making 100% of my, well, that's not true either, because I make more probably investing than I do with the newsletter. But regardless, the newsletter came into fruition at 100% probably about 13 years ago or so.
Great. Okay. So having had those many years of experience, how would you describe your current passion and current motivation? How has it changed over time, and where are you now in terms of the bigger picture purely on the metals, and what we'll come back to later, the sort of the wider picture?
Well, I'd say probably more passionate than ever, but probably a little more reserved, because I have almost 40 years in these markets. And so I do not let certain patterns in the silver and gold market, even in the stock market or the money supply thing, rattle me to the level that it might rattle a 30-year-old or 40-year-old or someone that's not as familiar with this. I mean, in other words, I've ridden this roller coaster for so long, I kind of know the ups and downs. So things that would drive me nuts in my 30s, I just kind of ho-hum today. Now, most people will get extremely upset at these type of things, but since I've been there, done that, they don't have the effect. But as far as being passionate, I'm more passionate, I think, than I've ever been, because the times are getting tougher and tougher as far as this monetary comeuppance, for lack of a better word, that I think is going to take place globally. And so my mission is to teach and empower people to understand the benefits of an honest financial system.
Okay.
And that's my main mission.
Okay, so we just as a quick recap for those listeners who may not know so much about the money system and the precious metals market, and please feel free to comment if you have a slightly different view. We've basically got a planet operating with, I used to say the word fake financial system, but let's just say at least a fundamentally flawed fiat money system, which is created by government diktat, which isn't actually fitting the definition of what money is defined as, because money needs to be a store of value, and as probably everyone will notice that what they think is money in their bank account or in their wallet is gradually getting less and less by the virtue of inflation, which in my personal view should be called devaluation. So we've got this whole system which has been running for quite a while, and underneath that we have what I like the title of a book by Nathan Lewis called The Once and Future Money, and I would say it's actually the once and existing and future money, because as far as I'm concerned, gold and silver hasn't changed its monetary status. It's just that the government may not have it as legal tender. But we have this real money, which happens to be primarily gold and silver, going for thousands of years back up to now. And we had a financial crisis in 2007, which hasn't been resolved yet. And we now have this amazing opportunity, in my view. So how would you comment and add on that sort of like current scenario for the person who doesn't really know about the details of monetary theory and the reason why it would be valuable to hold physical gold and silver now?
I think that best thing you look at is the truth. And the fact is that 100% of the time, whenever a fiat money system has existed, it's failed. So that fact is something to base an objective way of looking at the system.
So when you say that, you're basically saying that any paper money that's not properly backed by something, which is either promissory note or debt-based, has in fact failed. 100% failure record since beginning of time is what you're saying.
That's correct. So now with that premise, that's number one. So I'm going to keep this real simple. So number two, what has happened during those incidents that have gone on through history? And you'll find the result is that precious metals have been the best asset class you could hold during those times.
And what period of time are you looking at here?
Well, it depends on if you're looking at a debt liquidating depression like the 1930s or a hyperinflationary depression like 1923 in the Weimar Republic, or you go back into the Roman Empire where they debased the coins themselves and they went from silver to basically copper with a silver wash on them, or however it was accomplished. China was the first one to have paper money. When Marco Polo came back from China, he was very intrigued about the spices and the silk and everything you hear about. But what really excited them was that they had paper money and people would accept this stuff as payment. And China had 8 rounds of paper money and 8 failures of paper money. So the third thing is to research what I just said. Do your own due diligence, determine what I've said is fact, and then make your own conclusion. If paper money has always failed in the past, you can pretty much ascertain it will in the future. And what has protected you the best has been precious metals. And so if you research both those, then you have to draw your own conclusion. And my conclusion is that you should have some weighting in the metals themselves in case this happens again. And I think it's almost inevitable that it'll happen again. In fact, I believe it's a certainty. When it's going to take place, that's a little trickier to answer.
Okay, no, that's nice. I like that keep it simple approach. Even though I've been talking about this for a few years, not nearly as long as you have, it's sometimes a challenge for me to share the basic facts. And if you just say, well, don't believe what I say, just look at your bank account, look at the basic history books, and see what's going on. So given that, sort of like a nice resume for those listeners who may not be familiar with the basics of what's called the monetary system. I'm not even sure if it qualifies as that title, but let's stay with the normal terminology. What's your experience in terms of both your newsletter subscribers and talking on to media radio stations and media TV stations, how many people in society as a whole are waking up to these core elements, the basic understanding and the feeling that there is something wrong with the financial monetary banking system, and that not just gold and silver generally, but specifically physical gold and silver is potentially essential to hold? How many people, how do you see that in all your interviews? How do you see that awakening happening? And how quickly is it happening?
Well, markets usually have like three main phases. You have the stealth phase, basically, and stealth just means it's very unknown. Only the true metals heads or people that are very, very savvy about the financial markets and monetary history are even in the market at the lows, which was basically when gold bottomed at $252 and silver was under $5. And then you get the first run up. And that took place several years ago, basically from the year 2000 to, I don't know, I'd have to look at a chart, but 2005 perhaps, where you see silver peaked at like 840, and I forget where gold peaked at the time, maybe 500 or 6, I forget. And then you get the next phase up where you get kind of the accumulation phase where you start to get some of the public in, some of the money managers, and that takes a long time, and that goes back and forth a few times. And that's the phase that I believe we're in right now. And that's where more and more people are waking up to the story. I mean, to try to be succinct about your question, the stuff that I was saying on the radio interviews a decade ago are what's said in the mainstream press today. I mean, I was considered to be a bit of a kook or a radical when I was talking about this stuff 10 years ago. But now they just read it on the teleprompter because it's absolutely in their face, and you can't avoid it.
So, give us a couple of examples. What you were saying.
Okay. Well, for example, one of the times I was in London speaking at the Silver Conference, I talked about bank failures, and people being in line around the street to get their money out of the banking system. And I could hear the tee-hee-hee from the back of the room about this yank and what he's talking about. And the next time I was over there, Black Rock had just taken place. So I tee-hee-hee'd back to them that, I was right. And I'm not about being right, but I am about, being straight up and telling the truth and calling them as I see them.
Do you mean Northern Rock? Do you mean Northern Rock?
I'm sorry, Northern Rock.
Northern Rock. Yeah. Well, Black Rock would be interesting. It's the eco town, but yes, Northern Rock Building Society. Yeah. And of course, it's actually interesting that you mentioned the bank failures because statistics I've been following in America, and obviously there's more banks in America. Apparently, it's every Friday that they notify which banks failed or which banks been rescued, and they're failing all the time. Except it doesn't seem to hit the headlines that much.
No, it's amazing. Well, the news is pretty well controlled in my view, and so what you see is just what they want you to see for the most part. Of course, that's only true in the mainstream media. The Internet is the free market news source, and a lot of people get most of their news off the Internet these days.
Okay, so actually talking about the mainstream media, I asked you about our buyers waking up. So you're now saying that the mainstream media is using some of the information that you were talking about ahead of time, or at least on time, but people weren't listening, and now people are listening, but you're probably ahead of the curve again. As a percentage of people out there reading the papers, how I know that in terms of if you measure gold and silver in fiat money, you can show the charts with the fiat money price going up, which of course, as some people may realize, is partly because the fiat money is going down in value, so you need more of it to buy a certain amount of gold and silver. But let's stay within what I call the matrix for a moment. The charts are going up, and there's the first phase, the second phase, the third phase, for those who use this sort of market staging approach. And how has that really changed the story in the media, and how many people are getting it? And what phase would you say we're in? Are we in phase 2?
Yeah, I think we're still in phase 2. This is where you get a general awakening of people that are more or less ahead of the curve, or they see it from the mainstream and they say, something's wrong. I'd say rough numbers, the idea is much more important than the numbers, but probably 10% of the U.S. population is very concerned about the economic conditions. And I'd say the other 90% are pretty much oblivious to it because they only watch mainstream news, and they have not total, but a great deal of faith in the system as it exists, that everything is going to come out okay and, there's nothing to worry about. Of the 10% that are concerned and sense something's wrong, only a few percentage of them understand what's really wrong, and only a few percentage of those will actually take action. So my bare bones look is that maybe 1% of the population is actually in the metals. But if that doubled to 2%, I believe it will, that will start us in the next phase. So it's a long answer, but where we're at right now is we're in the accumulation phase where people that are willing to see the picture clearly and take some action by buying primarily physical metals, but maybe mining shares or ETFs or options or futures or any other derivatives products that are out there regarding the precious metals. So that's where we're at.
Okay,
and that's going to continue.
That's interesting because 1% is, I think, by any normal measure, a pretty small percentage of the population. And I'm amazed that those people who have read a little bit about gold and silver, the mainstream media keeps on talking about a bubble. And you did a very good element in the presentation that we both spoke at about a year ago in London, comparing the different types of bubbles and basically demonstrating quite simply that gold and silver are not in a bubble. And that in the UK, apparently, I don't know what the latest statistics are because they're a bit difficult to get hold of, it's only about 0.3% of the UK population have actually purchased any gold and silver for investing purposes. So 1%, are there any statistics in the States or any others you know about what the actual percentage of the population have physically purchased investment silver or gold?
There isn't. It's a wag. It's a wild guess. We don't know for sure, but that's probably close, and it's probably less than that. But it usually takes 2 to 3% to get enough momentum. You don't need 100%. You don't even need 50% to have a dramatic shift. As I said, if it is 1%, and that's probably fairly accurate, if that doubled to 2%, that would double the demand for physical gold and silver, and that would cause the fiat price to go up substantially from where it is now. Okay,
well, on that note, for those who don't know the basics, could you just give us sort of like a 3-minute nutshell of the key elements behind the silver story, i.e. the silver story from a fundamental perspective, from a technical perspective, and then from a monetary perspective as protection, and the profit investment perspective, kind of a short basics for beginners guide about why silver.
Okay, well, that's a challenge, especially to do it in 3 minutes. If you look at history, you will find that when both gold and silver were simultaneously used as money, which was by metallic standards, so you could use either silver or gold in purchases on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. What you found was that the ratio was 12 to 1. So it took 12 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. And that took place for hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of years. And that's what I call the natural ratio. That's the ratio of how much silver is in the ground relative to how much gold is in the ground. Now, people say that the natural ratio is 16 to 1. That's incorrect. It's inaccurate. It's not true. It's a false statement. The monetary ratio was developed by the Bank of England when Sir Isaac Newton put the Bank of England back on the gold standard because they're having significant monetary problems. He looked at the market, and I believe it was 15.5 to 1, roughly that idea. And so they asked him what would be the correct ratio, and he set that ratio rather than let the market determine the ratio. The market at the time had determined 15.5 to 1, but he set it fixed at that price, and that started causing some problems. So silver has had a long history of money. In fact, silver is silver definitely has been used as money for longer periods of time in more places, and it's much more transactions than gold ever has.
Yeah.
But yet most people don't understand that. China was the last to go up the silver standard, but silver was very plentiful and only used as money for a very long time until a bit beyond the Industrial Revolution. So we're only looking at the last 100 years or so where silver has had this huge growth in industrial demand because of its properties for conducting electricity, reflecting light, conducting heat. and these qualities that silver has better than any other element known. So as the supply of silver became more and more plentiful, it's just like anything, a large supply of something usually causes the price to go down, and that happened in the silver story a few times. Regardless, the industrial component came in, and slowly over time, silver became more and more an industrial metal and less a monetary metal. And that's still pretty much the case today. Right now, roughly 50% of the market is industrial demand. The other half is silverware, jewelry, and monetary demand. The reason to buy it and hold it is because it does have those two components, and it's recognized as money in most places in the world. The word for silver and the word for money is the same word in most Latin-based languages. Argent is the word for silver in France, and it's also the word for money. Plata is the word for money in Mexico, and it's also the word for silver. So the rest of the population, meaning outside of North America, Canada, and the United States, perhaps the UK, I'm not sure, most people, especially my age or older, recognize silver as at least having some play in the monetary system, and then don't disregard it as an industrial metal only. But many people in North America don't give sway to the idea that silver is money. Regardless, it has that component, and it's more affordable than gold, and it's got better dynamics than gold. So that's, I think, a rough, broad brush of the silver story. It's also much more volatile, and I've always advocated and continue to that you should have both metals. I don't think of a good precious metals portfolio as a silver-only portfolio. I think you should have gold as well as silver. And quite frankly, the older you are, probably the more you should favor gold over silver because it's more stable.
Okay. Well, thanks for that sort of summary. One of the things I've also been looking into, actually partly for this interview, is some of the phrases that are basically, my premise is, I don't know what you think about this, is that subconsciously, even though people are waking out of different phases, subconsciously, everybody listening to this call and those who are playing it back later or those who find out about this at some point in the future, at some level, they first of all, they know that there's something seriously wrong with the fiat money financial system. But that aside, they know or feel, or both, that whether it's described as money or not, that gold and silver are valuable and are long-term store of value. So I've been looking at, I thought I'd have a little look at some of the sort of idioms and phrases that are mentioned in history, which are using the word silver, and you probably know a lot more about this. And one of the ones is the phrase about selling the family silver. So my understanding is, you may know more about this, perhaps you can comment, is that families used to have silver cutlery and silver plates and what do you call those? They're called silver service, aren't they? The service. And they were known to be reasonably valuable. And it was only when you got down to your last few dollars, euros, pounds, or whatever it is, that you might consider selling the family silver, and otherwise you wouldn't. So inherently, I was thinking, well, here we are in our history. We already know that silver is valuable. Do you have anything to add to that particular historical phrase or idiom?
No, I think you did a good job. There's a movie, and I had quoted, and I can't remember which movie it is. I know it's Nicole Kidman is in there, and they do just that. They come to America, and after they paid passage on the big ocean liner, which was, fire-based in those days, they had a few silver utensils left in New York and sold those to get us fresh start. And this is based on a true story. I mean, it sounds funny to us today, but this is a fact. You're right.
Okay, and the other one I was looking up was the one that every cloud has a silver lining. And I thought, well, where did that come from? And apparently it's to do, originally, that the clues were from, the wording was slightly different, from a poem by Milton way back in the 16th, 17th century. I don't know if you've ever looked at that one.
No, I have not.
Okay, so what I'd like to move on to next is what I think is actually the more important area, which is, as well as the validity of buying silver, how can we, on a wider society level, on a freedom level, how does finding out more about precious metals and buying silver, how does that link to financial freedom, and how does that link? Is there any link to a sort of wider, if you like, energy approach? How can it link to how you see the system and being free?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I'll give it my best shot. I remember, you asked me how I got started, and by the time I was in my early 20s, I was on fire about this whole thing. And I was more selfish about it, really thinking like, well, if I learned all this stuff, I could obviously make some, rather dramatic capital gains and have a better lifestyle or more money or whatever. Since I've gotten older, it's more about giving back than how much I can get. But one of the lectures that I listened to early on was from James Dines, and Jim is still around, and he's one of the leaders. In fact, he calls himself the original gold bug. And I'll never forget it because it impacted me so much. And he started his speech by saying this. He said that all that exists in the universe is truth or resistance to it. But in the time that I've said $1 equals $1, I have lied because they've printed more, and watering the milk never works. And that really hit me in the head and the heart, because I believe that all that exists is truth or resistance to it. The whole system is built on a lie, and ultimately we're going to have to pay the price for that. So how do we align ourselves with the truth? And I think the idea that the truth will set you free is valid. And so we have to find out financially. The thing I like about what I do and the monetary aspect is it can be looked at in several ways, but money is the one thing from my experience that transcends everything. It transcends religion, it transcends gender, it transcends sexual orientation, it transcends race, it transcends anything, because everybody is concerned about money. And the only ones that are more concerned about money than the poor are the rich, because the rich are worried about if they're going to lose it or not. So everyone is concerned about money. And then if you analyze that, and this is my take on it, it's really not money per se. It's probably not even gold and silver per se. It's what people crave, and that's some kind of certainty in their lives. And the one thing about life that's certain is it's uncertain, that it's going to change, and whatever you think about is taking place in the future could or could not take place. In other words, there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of change, and you just have to get used to it. And today, we're in this accelerated change where you're getting so much information that people can't even cope with it all. So coming back on point, learn the truth, align yourself with the truth. If you have yourself truthfully set on any level, be it a spiritual level, be it a monetary level, be it a physical level, I think all those align. I mean, the whole system is corrupt from the top down, and almost it's corrupted. The food that we're producing now is corrupt. It might look better than ever, but it's got lower nutritional value than ever. You look at the air and the water supply, it's corrupted. You've got the air's polluted and the water's polluted. The financial system is polluted. The political structure is polluted and corrupted. So the whole system needs a great shaking out, an undoing, if you will, a realignment with the truth. And that, I think, will take care of the things that are bothering us, which is basically everything. The food supply, the energy supply, the political structure, the monetary system, and, probably more important, how we relate to each other. Because this idea that we're spiritual, if we're not practicing, someone asked me on a great radio show not too long ago, well, you sound like a pretty sharp guy, David. If you were going to make one change and one change only to right the system, what would you do? This is purely hypothetical, purely unbelievably impossible to do in reality. But I said if I could, if it were possible, I would take my magic wand and I would wave it one time and I would have one thing happen. Everyone, and I mean everyone, on the entire planet would have to tell the total truth for 24 hours. And if that were to take place, what changes would you see after that 24-hour period? You talk about one day making a change, that would make a change.
That's amazing. In fact, that reminds me of the film with Jim Carrey, Liar, Liar, where you have to do exactly that. Perhaps we could get Ben Bernanke or Tim Geithner or Mervyn King in that position. I think what you just said in the last few minutes is I sort of felt a little bit of a tingling in my spine. There's some amazing stuff that you've just come up with. I'd quite like to actually expand on some of that. The first bit you mentioned is that something that we probably all know, but we may not see it from afar, which is that we all want this stuff called money, and the poor want it coming from a space of scarcity, and the rich want it even though they've effectively got abundance. They're still concerned, and they still have a partial scarcity mindset because they're then worried they're going to lose it. And I suppose it begs the question of, why do we want all this? Well, first of all, what is it, which we touched upon earlier? And if you've got something that can be devalued every year and day, or possibly even over the weekend, then perhaps the money itself may not be something that you want. And why do you want it from a greed point of view? But I really think that you made an amazing insight there, that whatever your orientation, sex or whatever, money is this universal sort of, if flawed, means of exchange that we have. And perhaps just stepping back as to why that is, and do we need to have it, could be a key question. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I think that's a really interesting concept to investigate further.
Well, you're throwing me some pretty good questions, and it's not that I'm afraid of losing any credibility, because I'm not. It's just areas that I don't normally explore on an interview. But basically, if you look at it from a spiritual standpoint, and you look at who I am or who you are, are you different if you have money or not? And the answer should be no. In other words, if you lost everything overnight or over the weekend because of a bank holiday, and all of your assets in the bank were gone, your essence, your real you, your energy field, what you are really about should not change. Yet most people will change. And the reason being is that they are not their true self. Again, we come back to this idea of truth, where if you are truly you, it does not matter what the external is. It matters what the internal is, and that's a constant. And that's very difficult, and I'm not saying I'm there. What I'm suggesting for consideration is that's probably the goal, or that's a spiritual path that maybe some of us are striving to get to. Because when you get to the bottom line, let's take it on a physical format. Let's say that you're a super athlete. Let's take a real-life example. Let's take, I can't remember his name, but the gentleman that did the Superman films. What was his name that had the accident that came off the horse?
Christopher Reeve.
Exactly. So was his essence the same after he was paralyzed? And I would suggest yes. I mean, I think the way that man fought courageously, even though he couldn't walk again, his essence, what made him Christopher Reeves, was still there, even though he would never play Superman again. I don't know if I'm going too deep here, and I don't mean to, but you asked me the question. I get to answer it how I wish.
I think this is very interesting. And interesting, as you were going into a bit more detail, on a similar note, a thought that came to me, which I personally believe that this is probably a topic for another show with a different title, but I believe that some of these thoughts are coming through the universe because people are on a certain wavelength, and some may come from source or whatever. You know the phrase that there's no point in getting massively rich and keeping it all because you can't take it with you, i.e. you can't take it with you when you die. As you were saying that, I was thinking, well, can you really take it with you from Monday to Tuesday and Tuesday to Wednesday? And, talking about well, you say you've got money and I've got money. Well, do we really? I mean, is it just an illusion because you've got this screen in front of you saying there's some noughts and somewhere? What you've got is a facility to do something with these noughts and the pounds and so on, which can get you something else. But do you really own it? Do you really have it? So I guess we could go down that particular one further. And as you I totally agree with you that, if you're totally comfortable with who you are and you let go of the scarcity of needing money, then it doesn't really matter if you have 1 or 10 or 15 million and then you don't have it the next day, because you have the ability to interact with society. Although some people may say, well, that's probably a bit far. Which leads me to the second bit of what you said a few minutes ago, which I like, which is the certainty element. So anyone listening to this, whether they're into the investing stuff or not, what I'm hearing from you, and I'd like to just get you to expand a little bit on it. One of the key things, as I comprehend it, is that holding physical gold and physical silver, whether or not the paper money system continues or not, gives you that certainty. What would you say? Or some certainty.
That's right. I mean, the big question that most people that have studied the financial system, and they're concerned about making a wrong decision, so they want to know for certainty whether we're going to have more inflation or deflation because they think that would change their investment habit. In other words, they think that if you have inflation, then obviously you should have gold and silver, but if there's deflation, perhaps you should remain in the currency. But I like what Doug Casey says, and what he says is a crisis that's happening, whether it's an inflationary or deflationary crisis. It's a monetary crisis. It's just like going from the global warming to weather change. I mean, it's a broader base than just a specific side. Are we getting hotter? Are we getting colder? It's change. It's change. Same thing in the monetary system. And so people strive for certainty. So in a monetary change, the only thing that's constant that's money, is gold and silver. And so that's the reason that people gravitate to it consciously or unconsciously or subconsciously. It's because they know that an ounce of silver never changes. I mean, or an ounce of gold. And the only thing that changes is what it will purchase for you. I mean, this is the coin that was shown to Ben Bernanke by Dr. Ron Paul.
Oh, yes, I've seen that video. Yes.
Yeah,
brilliant video.
From my friends at the Silver Circle movie that will be out, I think, on August 15th of this year. And basically what he's saying is, look, this has maintained purchasing power. That's what your edict is, Mr. Federal Reserve, and you have failed miserably at it. These are my words, not his, but that's a summation of it. And it was very interesting because from the way I saw that interaction, Mr. Bernanke looked, I wouldn't say embarrassed, but it was causing him some pain because he knows that you can't print your way out of this mess, and that's really the only tool he has left right now.
Yeah, I think that I like that when you were saying about, apart from anyone who's listening, I would definitely recommend searching YouTube for the Ron Paul questioning of Ben Bernanke, who, as people probably know, is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, which is a private company owned by a lot of other banks in America, and see that just the expression or lack of expression on his face. The other thing that you just reminded me of is actually something I do use when I'm talking to people about gold and silver, which is I'm always looking for ways to connect with people on what they already know, going back to the truth element. And the simple question, which I think gets used a fair amount, which is something along the lines of, if you went to your, I don't know, great-grandparents' or great-aunt's house in the country and you digging around in the garden and you suddenly find this hidden shed in the background and there's a trapdoor underneath and there's two big chests of, inverted commas, treasure. One's got really, really old paper notes in it from way back when, a Continental or some other country or whatever, and the other one's got gold and silver in it, and your great relative says, you can have one of those, which one would you like? Which one are people going to choose? And why? And in case people listening haven't got it, it's the fact that everyone would choose the gold and silver one, because you know intrinsically the gold and silver retains its value and the paper money doesn't. So I think that element you were mentioning before about gold and silver holding its value for such a long time is an important part of the people buying it in terms of having certainty. So in terms of actually going back to a sort of more current time frame, out of all those who subscribe to your newsletter, how many of them are coming to the whole silver and gold story from a sort of, if you like, a fiat money profit motive, and how many of them have got what we're just talking about, the real physical holding side? Do you have a sort of feel?
I have a feel. It's just a guess because there's really no way to determine that. I would say of the people that are actually paid members of the Morgan Report, probably 10% are as passionate or adamant about the philosophical reasons that we're doing this. Maybe you could even call the spiritual reasons or the freedom reasons or the those type of untangibles. In other words, the idea that this importance of the gold and silver story is much more than preserving your own personal wealth or passing on a legacy to your heirs. It's all about the freedom of mankind to not be chained down by the powers that create money. But I'd say 10%. I'd say the other 80 to 90% probably are motivated to make money, profit, and use those proceeds to do whatever they care to do. In other words, pay off debt, start a business, pass it on to their heirs, buy another home, buy a boat, I don't know. So most people, I think, are just looking after making a sound or solid investment that will pay off over time. I don't think very many, maybe 10%, I'd say 20 at the absolute most, have any kind of philosophical concern about why they're doing this and why it really is so important.
I think that, my view, I don't know what your personal view is. Ultimately, I used to want everybody to get what I know, and then I let go of that because it's not for me to want anyone else to do anything. My passion is to share this information, which I think you have as well. But what I was going to say is that as long as somebody does it, even if they're doing it for slightly different reasons, if they bought the physical silver and they've stored it somewhere safe, then that's cool. They've made an action in the right direction. Okay, what I'd like to do now, actually, just so, because one of the things I feel is if I'm raising people's awareness about the silver market and the other metals as well, is not only get them interested, but then tell them a little bit about some of the myths and some of the, shall we say, risks which can be addressed. So could you just give us a very brief synopsis with your expert knowledge of the difference between the silver paper market and the physical market, and what that means for the new silver investor?
Well, there's all kinds of derivatives. So derivatives that most people listening know is derived from the underlying assets. So if silver physically exists, and it does, then there are derivatives of that silver. And what are they? And there's more than I can name, but there's a futures market that is a paper market based on silver that could be delivered in the future. I emphasize the word could, but not necessarily is. Very few silver contracts in the futures market, be them in London or be them in New York or Chicago or Hong Kong or anywhere else that trades these markets, actually performs a physical delivery of the metal, but thousands upon thousands of contracts are traded every day. So that's one derivative. Then you have options, which is another derivative on a derivative. It's an option. A futures option is an option on a futures contract. And then you have the ETFs, exchange-traded funds, which purportedly hold a certain amount of silver and then have a piece of paper that's aligned on that silver amount, and that fluctuates in the market. But again, that's a derivative. It's a piece of paper that's purportedly backed by silver. And you have, of course, mining shares, which some actually mine the metal and have the asset in the ground, but you don't get to share in the actual physical. All you get to share in is fluctuation in the stock price. And then you have mining companies that actually don't have any metal whatsoever, none at all, and they trade based on the silver price or how much promotion the stock is getting, or chat room chat or whatever. So there's all kinds of derivatives, and there's more than I've named, but that's the general idea. So the ratio is really an unknown. Jeff Christian, who writes for, or is the founder of CPM Group in New York, a pretty bright guy in my view. He publishes books on the gold market, the silver market, moly, platinum, palladium, vanadium, copper. They do a very good study on all the metals. And I think he's pretty objective. And Jeff has said that the ratio in gold is about 100 to 1. In other words, there's about 100 ounces of derivative product for every physical ounce of gold. And he spoke here recently at the Silver Summit here in Spokane where he changed that. He said, I looked it over after making that statement to the CFTC. It's actually about 400 to 1. Regardless, it's a multiple of hundreds to 1 amount of paper product there is in the precious metals, particularly gold and silver both, than there is in physical metal. So
if I can translate that for the layperson,
sure.
Basically anyone does as you said earlier in the interview, keep it simple. So I'm often accused of using financial jargon, so I kind of like to use the 5-year-old approach. So in plain language, would it be fair to say that if you think you're investing in silver by buying any one of these derivatives, something somewhere is seriously wrong or askew, because there can't be that many, because there's 400 times as many bits of paper or virtual trading account as there is actual silver, and therefore something is funny, and you're not really buying silver. Would that be a fair, simple statement?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
So that's one of the issues. So and the simple solution is,
well, to buy physical that you can hold, and once that is accomplished, then personally, I really don't mind people buying into the derivatives market if they choose to do so. But again, to repeat what you said, until you own the physical that you can touch and hold and have enough of that where you feel secure, then you don't really belong in the derivatives market. So I've always taught, and will continue to do so, that start your precious metals portfolio with the real metal first. Once you've accomplished that and you want to go further, then certainly you could look at, some derivative product. I like mining shares personally, but there are other products out there as well.
Okay. So basically, practical action for people listening, for those who haven't already, if you like, bought into the silver story. And I don't really agree with the silver bug, gold bug type of description. I think it was one of our colleagues, James Turk, or was it? Actually, it was Mike Maloney when he came to London, said, I'm not a gold bug. It's just at the moment I don't want to own anything else. And I like that. And you say, well, once a certain point is reached, then he will probably liquidate his physical gold holdings. Although I think you may agree with this, he still said he would always keep a small core amount. And a few months ago, it suddenly dawned on me how obvious this is. It's like saying, well, I'm going to sell my cash. If you said to somebody in the street, well, when are you going to sell your cash? People would say, well, what are you talking about? What do you mean, when am I going to sell my cash? It's cash. I'm keeping it. So I was thinking, well, that should be the way you think about gold and silver. So when are you going to sell your gold? What do you mean, gold? That's my money. I want to be selling it. I'm not going to sell it, which you can't do anyway. You can only exchange it when there's something I want to exchange it for.
Right.
So, okay, what I'd like to cover just before we come to the end of the show is a few other things, just going back very briefly to the mass media, because people ask me lots of questions, and I'm sure they ask you them even more. When should I buy, when should I sell, and all this stuff, and they're reading the papers. What is it about the mainstream media that is not sharing this information? Why would it be useful for people, for example, to sign up to your newsletter? What is it that's going on there, very briefly?
Well, the subtitle is Money, Metals, and Mining, and we look at those every month. Unless you have a foundation on what real money is and how the monetary system is structured, you really don't have the basis to make, I think, in my view, intelligent decisions regarding your money. Metals, we cover primarily the precious metals, but I look at other metals from time to time. And then mining is where you get pretty good leverage as a derivative, and we have top tier, mid tier, and speculative categories of those. So basically it's there to help people make as much money as possible while reducing their risk at the same time. Okay.
So in terms of any other actions that people might want to be doing, so, okay, some people here might sort of be ready to buy silver and gold as well. We haven't really touched upon gold, but I've heard a few people say, well, I think you said it at the beginning actually, if you're going to buy gold, buy silver. If you're going to buy silver, buy gold, so you have an allocation between the two. If they still want to do some more research in advance, I guess one good place would be to read your book, Get Your Skinny on Silver.
Well, that would be one, and then there's a lot of people writing in the silver space now, and there has been several in the gold space, and there's more all the time. So any good search engine, you could type in a specific, like history of gold or history of silver or history of money, or explore any of the ideas that we talked about today, Marcus, and, you know, have at it, because there's lots. There's also lots of Twitter and YouTube channels. I have a YouTube channel, Silver Guru. A lot of people really enjoy videos, and actually some of these concepts are easier to see than they are to read, at least in my view. So that's another source, and there's, you know, again, get on YouTube and type in history of silver or silver as money or silver's price projection or whatever, you know, specific you're looking for, and YouTube will pop that up for you. You can probably watch a video 2, 3, or 10 on the topic. So that's one. Twitter, I use it as a source to give people that follow me on Twitter what I'm reading and what I think is absolutely imperative to know on a daily basis in the financial system. It doesn't always revolve around silver or gold, but it involves the system as a whole. What's happening, for example, when Russia and China agree to do direct trade circumventing the U.S. dollar. The dollar is on the decline. That is a huge, huge shot across the bow, telling people that are aware and awake that the U.S. dollar is going to go, in my view, into the dustbin of history, just like all fiat currencies. But what's so upsetting this time on a global basis is it's the basic structural element for the entire global system. So if the U.S. dollar goes down, basically the entire system goes down, because everybody's reserve isn't gold. The reserve is the U.S. dollar.
Okay, we're just about coming up to time now, but thank you very much on that. One important thing I do want to mention just before we close is, of course, your website, silver-investor.com. So people can sign up there for different levels of newsletter. You've got the YouTube Silver Guru channel. And I think in closing, I just want to say thank you very much, David. Really appreciate you coming on this show. And I think going back to the title of the show, the silver bullet, which the definition is a simple guaranteed solution for a difficult problem, is buy silver, buy physical. Thank you very much indeed, David, for coming on the show.
Marcus, my pleasure. Thank you.
Fantastic. That's signing out. Marcus Matthews on the Money Maverick on untangledfm.com. Hope to see you next week. Thank you and good night.